He's a big time playmaker. I get why people want him, but this would be year 9 of his career. If an injury pops up, yeah, I think it would be a nice plan B.
Johnny Mac, something I wanted to run by you, something I'm seeing all over the social media world, all over YouTube, is a potential target for the Eagles on the defensive side of the football. A former Vic Fangio player, a guy who excelled in Vic Fangio's system and spoke very highly of Vic Fangio when he was hired by the Eagles. Justin Simmons. Do you like Justin Simmons? Do you like the potential of that? What's your thoughts on potentially bringing a guy like that in to be a safety for the Eagles? I'll tell you before I give you a chance to respond. I like it from the veteran perspective. We talked a lot about the defense earlier in the week. A lot of communication, a lot of terminologies, a lot of moving parts on defense, and you got a lot of young players. I think a guy like Justin Simmons would help in that regard. What say you?
Well, I'm picking up my phone. It's May 17th, my mom's birthday. So happy birthday, Mom. But if, that's late for a Pro Bowl, all pro level player to be out on the market. So that's my first indication. Why is he out there? My indication, my thought process is, well, he still wants to get paid like he's a Pro Bowl level player, and he's holding out until something happens and that spot opens. Now, if so, there's two parts to this. If you tell me you can get him for 1 year, 3.5 million, that could make up the 7.5 million, like Devin White got, I'd be like, yeah, bring him in. Why not? Let's see what's left in the tank. He's only 30, much better player than Devin White. Second team All Pro, I think 4 times. Very, very good player and big system as well. Why not? If you're telling me 1 year, 15 million or even something like that, I'm like, probably not. So, where is he? Not where is he in a thought process of what he wants for his career? Is he going to look at the landscape and say, it's not fair, but this is the way of the world in the NFL? I'm not as concerned about safety with the Eagles as everyone else seems to be. And the big name trap is always part of it, and I get that because everybody knows, and because he was a 4-time All-Pro, he'll be a 4-time All-Pro in stasis, as I always like to say. Like Devin White was a second-team All-Pro once, and everybody, he was an All-Pro. Well, he hasn't played like it in about 3 years. So this league moves very, very quickly, and there's a reason he's still out there. So what are you going to get? Who knows? Could he be better than Reed Blankenship? Yeah, of course. But I think the Eagles like Reed Blankenship. I think they want him on the field. I think they like Sidney Brown. And I keep saying Sidney Brown's going to be back. And if he's not back for week 1, he's going to be back very early in the season. And the Eagles like him. So then you start talking about the reality of building a roster. And I always talk about this, and I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and very few people realize it or don't want to realize it. They just want the best players. They want well, he'll be the fourth safety. Again, if you're knocking people down and saying, all right, what's their role from that point? You got to be involved on special teams with Michael Clay, and that was a very big part of the strength of this team last year. How deeply do you want to affect that unit? Simmons has to start if he's here. He can't be a backup. So then you're knocking down Reed Blankenship and you're knocking down Sidney Brown even further. I wouldn't do it. I don't think it's necessary at this point. but I get because of the big name and all that kind of stuff, I get why people want to go in that direction.
Yeah, I like it from the perspective of the veteran presence. I don't know how much he has left in the tank or how big of an impact he would be, but what I don't like is, every action has a reaction to it, and I think there would be somebody would have to get cut. I mean, there's a lot of people on that back end. There's already guys that are going to have to get
Well, they
cut.
still need a force safety. So, and that's where people say, well, they need a force safety. But again, he's not a force safety. He's a starter.
Right.
He's a starter, or he's not even in the conversation because he's not going to do those other things. He's
Well,
not,
does he give the team a chance to win extra games? Does he give the team a chance to be a better football team?
I don't remember they picked up a two-time All-Pro last year in Kevin Byard, but he wasn't a two-time All-Pro anymore. As I see you shaking your head.
He was
I
a
mean,
disappointment
on
last
on February 15th, I believe, or mid-February, I was just looking at this because is when the Bears cut Eddie Jackson. Eddie Jackson is also 30. Not quite to the level of Justin Simmons, obviously, but he was a star player in Chicago at one point, under Vic Fangio, at least early in his career. He was in fact, he was a first team All Pro, something Justin Simmons has never accomplished. Two-time Pro Bowl player, voted one of the greatest Bears of all time there when they did their top 100 of all time. Really good player, playmaker, interceptions all over the place. Really, really good player in his prime. He's still out there with the history of Big Fangio. On February 16th, I remember you got to get Eddie Jackson. You
Right.
got to get Eddie Jackson. Nobody wants Eddie Jackson. What? Why?
Is it money related? I mean, I guess these guys they're older and people don't want to bring them in. I mean,
Well, that's part of it. The league, once you hit that 30, they're probably a little bit too slavish to that mentality of guys on the downside when they hit 30. But in the case of Eddie Jackson, it's a little like I'm not trying to compare him as players. Simmons was a better player. He hasn't, early in his career with Chicago, first 3-4 years, rookie contract, really good player, basically. And the past couple years, he's been average at best. So he's clearly descending. I get it more. I only bring up Eddie because of the big connection, and everybody was so hyped up. You got to go get him immediately. You don't have to wait. They, blah, blah, blah. And he's still out there. The fact that Justin Simmons is still out there concerns me. In his case, I think he's probably holding out for that big time money, and people have already budgeted their big time money.
yeah, it's May. I think that ship has sailed.
Now, but again, from his perspective, all it takes is one injury.
Right.
Like if CJ Gardner-Johnson shows up to training camp and God forbid he gets hurt and it's significant, then you reopen those conversations and maybe you pay a guy like that $10 million to come in and sort of save you. I think that's his plan. And you shouldn't hope that that's the Eagles because you don't want anybody to be injured. But just bringing him in, I don't know. There's people don't believe in Reed Blankenship because he was undrafted. We went through this with TJ Edwards. I don't give a shit at this point. You saw him on the field. Now, if you want to evaluate him on the field and say he's not good enough, I'll listen to that. But I don't want to hear he's undrafted so he can't play. The Eagles think he could play.
I like
I
Reed.
think
He
he
plays
could
with his
play.
hair on fire. We need that on this defense. That's why I'm happy we got CJ Gardner-Johnson back. We need guys that want to go out there and hit somebody and tackle and be aggressive. And
yeah, and then you got more two. Then you have the redundancy of two coverage safeties as well. And you talk about the physical nature. CJ's more of a coverage guy. I would say Justin's more of a coverage guy. And you lose some of that physicality as well. But, he's a guy who has 30 interceptions, which is phenomenal. in this era where interceptions are cut down. So he's a big time playmaker. I get why people want him, but this would be year 9 of his career. You know, if an injury pops up, yeah, I think it would be a nice plan B. I'm not going out there. The Eagles already bought out Reed Blankenship's restricted free agency year.
Yeah, which is next year, right?
Yeah. So that tells me a lot.
Yeah, they like the player.
Yeah, they like the player. And they're not looking for immediacy. So this is a guy who, if he said, I want a starter, then you go after Justin Simmons, and they don't want a starter right now. So I don't necessarily see it as a fit at this particular moment. And they'll probably sign him. They'll probably sign him at 10:05 after I say that.
I doubt it. Not yet. Maybe later in the summer, I could see that happening. John, anywhere else on the defense right now that you think they need to address? I know, obviously, I'm not going down the linebacker path.
Well, I mean, but it's so obvious.
Yeah, but what about like defensive tackle? Like you got Jordan Davis, you got Jalen Carter, you got Milton Williams. After that, I mean, I know you have Marlon, you have a couple other guys. They have that undrafted guy that everybody is acting like is going to be a big. Like, do they need more depth at that position?
Well, I think they need a backup for Jordan Davis.
Because if Jordan Davis goes down, the whole defense is going to change.
Yeah. But those guys that's easier said than done to find a guy to back up. And they brought in PJ Mustipher, who's a kid from who was at Penn State. And he's got some size, and who knows? You're trying to roll. Remember, it's not like you're going to get an impactful nose tackle, but you need somebody with those types of traits, so you can at least replicate those 5-man fronts we talked about earlier this week.
Right.
And I don't know if they can do that right now. Right now, they probably have Marlon Tuipulotu do it. And he could.
Seems like that's not I don't want to say a dying breed, but there's less of those guys in the NFL today.
Well, there's a bunch of them, but yeah, there's not a lot of depth to those guys. There's you can find a 340-pound guy. They had Noah Ellis for a year and a half trying to develop him. Christian's brother is 340 or something, but they couldn't develop him into anything. So, and that's sort of like Mustipher. Mustipher's not that big, 320-ish. And we'll see if they get, because we're talking about a backup. We're not talking about a starter. And you're not going to be able to bring in somebody, but you need that trait. And I talked about it a lot. Jonathan Gannon's first year, he didn't have it. So people didn't even know he was playing big defense because he couldn't use the 5-man fronts as much as he would have liked.
Right.
And that's because they didn't have a nose tackle.
Yeah, let's get to our first commercial break. Coming up next, Paul Domwich, who joins us every Friday. We'll get his thoughts on the Eagles' schedule and some of the other things Johnny Mac and I have been kicking around. I want to say good morning and thank you to all of our viewers in the chat box today. James, Twiz, Mark, Eagles, Green Talons. We appreciate you guys all for being in here today and this morning after a good week, another good week in Eagle Land. OTAs start Monday, so a lot to look forward to next week. Make sure you guys drop a like on the show to help Birds 365 grow. We appreciate it. We'll take our first commercial timeout. Coming up next, Paul Domwich on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.